Karen Shuey. I cover politics at the state and federal.
Okay.
Karen Dumaresq, I cover education.
Jim Burchek, to New Era Editorial.
Thank you. And I'm Carolyn Dumaresq, the acting secretary, and Tim Owen is our director of communications. And my transport. That's today. Again, I don't know what's most comfortable for you. Obviously, there's some things I want to share with you today and some issues. And then, so if you have questions, I don't know whether you ask them as we go along, if there's a particular thing I'm discussing that you want me to go into more detail on. Is that
Yeah,
good?
yeah.
Kind of like the teacher in me, you know, I take questions as we go instead of waiting to the end of my class. I don't know if you know a little bit about my background. I've been a teacher. I've been a junior high school assistant principal, high school principal. I've been a superintendent in 2 school districts, superintendent of record vocational school in Harrisburg. And I've had 2 tours of duty at the Department of Education, one under Thornburg and one now. And in between superintendencies and retiring and then coming back as the deputy secretary, I was the executive director for PSEA, which is the state teacher.
That would make you rather atypical, would it
Yes,
not?
it does make me really atypical. I just have, in the 44 years I've been doing this, I just keep focused on children, and that seems to get me through wherever I'm sitting. So yeah, you're right. And I have done work in 3 different universities as a guest instructor, a visiting professor at Temple and Penn State and Widener. So I've got a little taste of higher education from the classroom side. So it's been a great journey. So here I am, acting secretary of education. I've been with the department for since the beginning of the Corbett administration as the deputy secretary for elementary and secondary education. I came in to do that. I spent a little bit of time as the executive deputy, and now in the seat of the Secretary of Education. So what I want to do is just take you a little bit through the budget that was just presented and some of the reasons and the rationale.
You guys have in front of you in the folders a copy of what the Secretary is going to talk with you about, and then on the left side is some amount of funding going to school districts in Lancaster and Chester counties. I know you also cover part of Chester County, so just to let you know they have in front of you.
Good, thank you. So again, over the last 3 years, we've been working on a number of initiatives, educational initiatives for the Corbett administration. And they're focused at really 2 things. One is increasing accountability, and the other is transparency of results. So the first thing that we did, if you take a look, and again, this is kind of the math teacher in me, you'll see a little diagram that looks like a Venn diagram, circles. And for me, at least all the initiatives that we've been working on are focusing at one thing, which is increasing student achievement. And so I talked a little bit about the efforts of increasing accountability, and I'd like to talk about 3 major initiatives that in fact support what we've been doing. The first one is looking at raising the rigor of the knowledge, the things that students know and are able to do when they graduate from Pennsylvania high school. So the way we did that was to take a look at our educational standards. We have a long history in Pennsylvania, something called Pennsylvania's academic standards. What those standards are statements that say for public schools, these are the things that a student should know and then be able to do, because some of them are actually operational issues. And we had, again, from being a superintendent and being a part of the Workforce Investment Board in my time, both at PSEA and now in the Corbett administration, had been on the Governor's Workforce Investment Board and heard a lot of feedback from businesses and also from colleges on things that were not as strong as they would like to have our graduates come out, not only in content knowledge, but in application skills, especially in math. So we began that hard work, and then also from the colleges in the number of remedial courses, even in our community colleges, that students need to have. Now, obviously, that's a concern because they're non-credit courses, and so that students still have to pay. We all know the debt load that some of our children are experiencing as they graduate, or parents from school. As a parent, I know. So we really want to get children more college and post-secondary ready, and if we can in the public schools to help to alleviate those non-credit courses. So we began a lot of work with Pennsylvania educators from, again, across the Commonwealth, not only in K-12 education, but also in higher education, especially those teachers in higher education who were teachers of the first math or the first literature course that students would take, to say, what is it that students really need to be able to learn and be able to do when they graduate? So we took a look at our academic standards, especially in the areas of reading, math, and science, and we took a look at a national effort that had been going on by the Governors Association and by chief school officers and secretaries of education across the nation as they were called together to say, is there some commonality that we all should have as students? Because we do have military children, we have parents who are mobile, moving through the United States. Is there something that we can all agree that should be in what they called common core standards? When we pulled our educators together and we looked at the national models and we looked at the old Pennsylvania academic standards, we said, what are those things that we need to keep, and what are the things that we need to enhance or make stronger as we move into the 21st century for the jobs of the future and those types of issues. So what we did was we worked again with Pennsylvania educators, and they took a look at both and they said, well, we really like the pacing, for example, in math, some of our math skills. We like the fact that we introduce statistics earlier than the national Common Core. So we want to take these, we can see where the rigor in some of these areas are going, so we can embed that back into our academic standards. But what we decided to do in Pennsylvania was to in fact come out with Pennsylvania's core standards that in fact are a reflection of Pennsylvania educators, Pennsylvania students, and made them really more personal to Pennsylvania. And they are more rigorous. They are expecting more from students as they graduate from Pennsylvania high schools. And probably as we speak, they're being ready to be published in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. We've gone through all the sign-offs that you need to have, which is not only our state board, but then the Independent Regulatory Review Commission looks at them, then the Attorney General has to look at them for formal legality, and then the Governor's Office obviously has to sign off. So all those approvals have been given, and we're about to publish those in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, and they'll become an force of law, if you will. So the standards have been increased, and from those standards, then they are given as guidelines to school districts. This is the framework of what K-12 math should look like, K-12 literature reading at the earlier levels, and in particular one science course, which was biology. So what happens then is local school district, because we are a locally controlled state, decide what the curriculum is going to be. If this is the standard that students, for example, in third grade math should be able to add double-digit numbers, should be able to subtract and carry over. That's the goal. So how do I build that curriculum? What are those steps that we get, how do we introduce it, how do we reinforce it in mastery, and how do we go farther? That's a local control issue. What textbooks and supplies are used, local control issue. The state's measurement of accountability then is so that we know how well a school is implementing those standards are the state assessments. The state assessments that we have are state tests, which are 3 to 8 in math, reading, and science, and writing, and also our new Keystone exams measure how well those standards are being implemented in a local school district. So the assessments are aligned to the standards. The school districts have the flexibility to introduce their own curriculum and materials, and that's how we know whether in fact the standards are being met. The state assessments, naturally, as we raise the rigor of the standards, obviously those state tests need to be adjusted and raise the rigor for those. So what we've done, again, working over the course of the last few years, is that we made a decision early on that if we were going to not adopt the Common Core, the National Common Core, but in fact we were going to have our own version of rigor in Pennsylvania, those tests needed to match our standards. So we decided not to go with the national test for a number of different reasons, one being the alignment, the other being unknown costs and and some of them are only going to be given online as opposed to paper and pencil. We know not all of our school districts have the capability to do online testing for all their students. So we've gone with our own state assessments, again, developed by Pennsylvania educators and then validated to match our state standards. So we'll be rolling those out. We have the Keystones, which are our graduation requirement tests. They are the tests that have replaced the 11th grade PSSA, which was kind of a survey assessment. And these tests are designed to be delivered closest to instruction. And as an educator, closer to instruction, better measure of attainment, if you will. So they're kind of like final exams. And our final exams are in literature, really geared toward what I would say 9th and 10th grade rigor of a literature course, if in fact a child was going on to college. And biology, which tends to be, again, depending on the sequencing of the science test, could be anywhere in the high school science curriculum. And then in math, Algebra 1. Now, Algebra 1 in some of our schools are given in 8th grade, but it is the core fundamental course that you need. If you don't have good skills in Algebra 1, you can't do geometry, because all the formulas that you have in geometry on area and volume and those types of things it's really algebra, application of algebra. You can't obviously do Algebra 2, trig, and calculus. It's the foundation course and again, problem solving that we need. Some take it in 8th grade, some 9th, 10th. It depends on the child, and again, when they are taking the Algebra 1 course. So we've been about the last 3 years redoing the standards, redoing the assessments. The Keystones have been rolled out. This was the first year that they went actually into effect. The students will take them and then they bank their scores for 11th grade for federal reporting purposes. But and then the 3 to 8 tests, we've been field testing them last year, 3 to 5. This year we're doing 3 to 8, so then we get to see how those test items perform, which ones were too easy, which ones were too hard, which ones stay in the tests that we give. And establishing the cut scores for those, and they'll go into implementation next year. So we've finished the alignment of standards, we've finished the alignment of state assessments, of that part of the rigor. So I'll take a breath there before I move on to the next. There's questions on state assessments or standards.
You said about that, obviously Keystones were developed specifically for Pennsylvania, and the development of the PA4 standards.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that Pennsylvania has dropped out of the PARC consortium?
We were never, there's 2 ways you could be in the PARC, and then there's Smarter Balance consortium. There were 2 national consortium developing tests. One were developing tests that were more like survey tests, like our old 11th grade tests, and another more like our Keystone tests. We were never what they call participating, which means hadn't signed on to give the test. We were there as observers so that we could watch the trends actually in both of the national consortiums. And when the state board made the decision, no, we're not going to go for a number of reasons into the national consortium, we wanted to start early on with our own tests. And so we started this year. So yes, if withdrawn means we're not participating anymore, we watch, we listen.
Right, because the website lists Pennsylvania as
I think there's a different word for what we do.
Okay.
We're just there watching. And actually, if there's good resources that match our tests, we would certainly put them on our standards aligned system for districts to use if they were there. But we've really gone a different way.
And what company is developing the
That's our DRC, the Data Recognition Corps. It's the same company. Now, their contract expires this year, so we're about to go out for bid. And of course, the bidding process, it will depend on who has the most efficient pricing that can meet the standards on that bid. So.
Since you've been in education, over the last decade or more, there's been a lot of talk about teaching to the test, a lot of talk about too much testing. Is there too much testing done? Are we basing everything on what kids can test as opposed to what they may actually know?
It's a great question. I think too much testing, I think, is in the eye of the beholder. And I would say that the only thing that the state mandates is what we need, not only to comply with federal regulations so we can continue to receive Title I money, which is millions and millions of dollars that come into Pennsylvania so that we can demonstrate that we have rigor inside our classrooms. But so we test in 3 through 8 in reading and math, and then in alternate grades in a science and a writing test, and then we test 3 subjects, which could occur any time from 8th grade to 11th grade. I don't think that's too much testing. What I think happens is locally school districts make decisions about using, could be nationally normed tests for placement, there could be honors test at the end of the honors courses that the SAT company, ETS, gives. Could be international baccalaureate testing that they do for more advanced students. So local school districts make decisions about how many other tests are given. So I think we give the minimal amount that checks on our standards, and local districts are able to do whatever, add whatever they would like. I think sometimes folks get confused when they see the testing calendar. They'll say, look how many days of testing. And I know some folks love to get up at the poster board and say, look at all these weeks of testing. Well, tests aren't given all those days. What that is, the options for school districts to pick the time within those 2 weeks that we offer the 3 to 8 testing, and say, you pick what's best for your schedule as you know your students are ready then to interact with the test. So all that time, now the tests are on time, students get to take the time they need to finish them, but most students take about 2 days of testing in order to complete a PSSA, and of course it would be 1 day of testing for a Keystone, not even that, unless a child needs different accommodations or more time to take them. So for example, this year, school districts, because of the weather, said, excuse me, we need you to change the testing dates because we missed instruction. So I went out, because I always liked when I was a superintendent before somebody in Harrisburg made a decision for me. I asked the superintendents, I said, here's the 2 weeks of testing that we open up that you can give. And here's, as far as we will give an extension for an additional 2 weeks, so it's which would you rather have? Well, of course, being fiercely independent folks that we have out there, some of them said, don't change it, we're fine, we haven't lost that many days, we'll be ready. We have our whole schedule. Others said, oh my God, yes, that would be a huge help. So what you'll see this year is 4 weeks of testing. Again, we're not testing through that whole period. It's options for school districts based on their schedule and their needs to interact and deliver that test whenever they believe they're ready. So I'd also like to answer your question about teaching to the test. Remember back when I said we have standards that all schools are responsible to deliver, and the state assessments measure whether those standards have been given. So I'm not sure what else you'd be teaching to if it weren't. You're supposed to have curriculum that match the standards, and the tests match the standards. So you should be teaching what's in that test. That's what you're required to deliver, plus whatever else you'd like to do. So I always say, well, what else are you teaching? If it's not at least this, because that's by law you're required to deliver the standards. So I think it's kind of, we play this wordsmithing game when people like to complain, oh, we're taking time to teach to the test. Well, the state tests are matched to the state standards. So yes, you are teaching, in fact. I prefer as an educator to say, I'm teaching the content. It just happens to be measured by those tests and, in fact, related to the standards that I'm held accountable to as a chief school administrator or commissioned officer of the state. So I know some of my colleagues, we get into that little conversation, but if in fact you're teaching content and your curriculum is a strong curriculum, you're actually teaching your curriculum, which just happens to match the standards, as it should.
What about the concern that there's so much effort to differentiate teaching content, but then every student takes the same exact type of test?
Well, differentiating instruction isn't changing content. And as a good teacher, you should be differentiating your instruction because you have children in your classroom that are auditory learners, they're visual learners, they're tactile learners. So you should be adjusting your delivery systems to differentiate your students. And you also should be adjusting your instruction because you have some students who need more reinforcement, some need acceleration. The hybrid learning, when we get to that, is a great example of that. So I'd say, yes, you should be differentiating instruction. What you should not be differentiating is the end goal of the content that you're supposed to teach.
But do the tests reflect the different ways that students can demonstrate their learning?
In fact, that's a good question too. The test can be delivered either online, and that's an option for school districts. So some kids are better doing this, some are better on paper and pencil. We also, for our Keystones, in recognizing that some students are good in traditional testing modes, we have project-based assessments, which are really kind of a hands-on, you can demonstrate through a project that you've learned the content, which is new this year.
You talked briefly about, because of the weather, extending the testing window.
Right.
You had also, I think, also talked about the fact that some schools have asked for perhaps is it possible to get a waiver on the 180-day rule. But I think you said something about it's more tied to hours as opposed to the days.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. First of all, to waive 180 days of instruction isn't within my power to do. That's a legislative. However, what we can do through something in 1504, which is a piece of the law, we call them Act 80 days, is you can make a decision to say, I'm going to use some of my days for parent-teacher conferences. I'm going to use some of the days for teacher in service. But my instructional day is going to be more, let's say I'm a secondary principal, it's going to be more than the minimal 5.5 hours, which is the equivalent of 180 days of instruction. And I actually have 6 hours of instruction that I'm giving. So I can say, in lieu of the 180 days, I want to do this. It needs department approval. And the regulation, most superintendents come in at the beginning of the year to ask for that because they have snow days built in and they know that they'll be fine. But the regulation allows superintendents to come in until July, the end of July of that academic year, to say, you know, I've looked at my instruction, I've met the minimum numbers of hours that I need to make, but I may not have made the 180 days. I'd like to swap that off. So what I've reminded them of is that flexibility, and they can see as they're approaching through the year, as they're adding days or they're adding hours into the program, they have that option. It's the flexibility I'm allowed to give.
Now, my understanding is, did you send a letter out to superintendents
Just, I
this
think
week?
it went out yesterday from
Okay,
Steve
and
Fisher.
this was the substance of that,
That's
about
exactly it.
this then?
The flexibility,
Okay.
right. Again, as I got the question asked this morning, as if it keeps getting worse, other than that's going to have, that shift will have to come from the General Assembly. I just caution folks that I know it feels nice to say, oh, we'll give you the flexibility and you don't have to have those minimum numbers of hours. But what we're talking about is the minimum number of hours we believe a student needs to be engaged in content to get to those standards. And the more we take away, that's the less they learn. So we need to be, it's a tough balance between giving the students an appropriate amount of instruction and trying to be flexible because of Mother Nature. So.
And I would imagine also with seniors, some of them may be going to school starting in the summer, which would bump right up against perhaps graduation.
And for seniors, there are different rules for graduation. So, we'll move on to some different accountability. So we talked about standards and assessments. We've also been working for the last 3 years on something we call educator effectiveness. And we've been working on this. Actually, I worked in the previous administration as a consultant to the department on this issue of teacher effectiveness, because we know by research and by watching children's growth that one of the most important things that you can do to increase student achievement is have an effective teacher in the classroom before them. And the second most important, at least in the school setting, not to dismiss the importance of parent involvement, is a strong building leader or a principal. So we looked at the support systems that we had in place for teachers. We had a very probably easy to fill out, but not very helpful in improving instruction evaluation system of teachers, and a non-existent one for principals in Pennsylvania. So we were able to attract through federal dollars support to implement a revised teacher evaluation system, and we've been working on that. Actually, as I said, a year before, but piloting it for the last 3 years. But the teacher evaluation system went into place for classroom teachers who deliver direct instruction. This year is a different system. And again, we had a stakeholder group that had teachers, principals, IU directors, higher ed folks, parents, business leaders. And we worked with that stakeholder group. In fact, they for teachers will sunset. We'll have our last meeting coming up shortly. And we went to them and said, what are the models nationally that are out there that we could bring to you? And we worked with a professor out of the University of Pittsburgh. The federal dollars allowed us to, and actually an initial Gates grant that we had, allowed us to engage a professor from the University of Pittsburgh to actually do a national survey to say what systems are being used across the country that measure effective teaching. So really what we're saying is, what is the language of effective teaching? What is it that teachers do in the classroom in instructional methods that in fact increase student achievement, that have been shown to have a correlation? If teachers do this, then student achievement is successful, students learn. There were a number of models that were brought back to the stakeholder group, one of them being Charlotte Danielson, who's done lots of research on effective teaching components. We looked at Marzano, and there were a few other researchers that were out there, but we were actually looking for those programs that had been validated, that the components weren't just theoretical in some professor's mind or some researcher's mind, but actually had been validated to show that if teachers did this, student achievement was successful. Our stakeholder group looked at them and decided that Danielson, they wanted to endorse Danielson's 22 components of effective teaching to be the language of effective teaching for Pennsylvania. Other states have picked, like Jersey, New Jersey, I know that because my youngest daughter's an administrator there in a public school, they've picked multiple models. One of the concerns I had was that while we have allowed in our regulation the flexibility for school districts that they want to use other pieces for that left-hand side, other research designs to come in, and as long as they're at least as rigorous as what we have, that is fine. But I also knew that it'd be important, again, from my 44 years in public education, that it's one thing for the state to pass a regulation. If they don't provide support services, or they don't provide the kind of training and planning and then support services for professional development, we really just put another Band-Aid on top of districts and walked away and not been a good partner. So one of the things that we decided is we'll pick Danielson and we'll develop intensive support systems to train teachers, train principals, and to support them later, as in fact the system gets implemented. If the principal goes in and the teacher, and they realize through the conversations in their first conference saying, you know, my classroom management wasn't the best, my questioning techniques, my wait time, my planning wasn't very good, my differentiation of instruction wasn't best for what I could do. There, for each of those 22 components on our standards aligned system, hopefully you've all visited the standards aligned system that we've had there, which all kinds of resources that are for schools. In the Professional Development Center for each one of the Danielson components and an overview of Danielson, there's free courses for Act 48 credit for teachers to take when in fact even if they're interested they can take them because they're free. But if they have a teacher improvement plan which would identify one of those components, there is a professional development course for them to go in to take. Again, it's interactive, it's online, they can take it at any time on their schedule. They're really great because they have a lot of downloaded resources and texts they can go and look at, a lot of good articles and research that support those components for effective teaching. So we've provided that kind of, well, we're not just going to come in and say, you're not very good and walk away. We've said, you know, this needs improvement and here's help. Because what the system should be about isn't just finding bad teachers and getting rid of them. It should be finding those teachers who can improve, supporting them, and getting them to be more effective teachers in the classroom. So that's the new classroom teacher evaluation system for the left-hand side of that circle. On the right-hand side, something brand new for Pennsylvania, is in fact an accountability system that holds the instructor accountable for student achievement. So it's not just enough that I get up and I deliver instruction. It's important that I make sure the students have learned that content. So what's in the right-hand side is something called a school performance profile, which we'll get to in a minute, which looks at multiple measures. Again, it's been a 3-year journey across the state, over 4,000 folks and focus groups to say, if we were to want to measure this academic success of the school building, what should we be counting? So it's a school building by building, over 3,000 school buildings in Pennsylvania in the public schools, and takes a look at that to say, what do you want to be measured by? So the obvious ones are percent proficient in advance in the state test, but also has a heavy component on growth, because we know that all students don't come to us at the same level, ready to learn. So what's important there is when the child got to the teacher here, how far was that teacher able to move them? And moving them 1 year of academic growth is okay, that's good. What we'd like to see, especially for the children behind, is those types of instructional strategies that moves them more than a year, and the teacher gets more credit for the farther along that child has progressed. So there's growth measures in there. There's things like a promotion rate, retention, the converse of that, graduation rate, the performance on International Baccalaureate, performance on advanced placement, participation in SATs, SAT scores, not if in fact the child is a vocational student, which replaces some of the other measures. So it's a very rich look at those measures that principals told us this is how we would like our buildings measured. in lieu of just AYP, percent proficient in advance, and then that's the only measure we have. It's a much truer picture again. So that goes into all teachers in the building. For teachers who deliver a statewide assessment, there's another part of this component that says, did you grow your students a year's worth? And if you did, that's great. If you do them more, you get extra points on the evaluation. Instead of being proficient, you may be distinguished level if in fact there's that growth measure really intervening with the students. And then we have a piece which I'm really excited because it really gets to what I call data literacy, which is how can you use data, student achievement data, to improve your instruction. And well, it's an elective piece, and the process we use is called student learning objectives. You may hear that in other states as they're working on that. It really gives the principals and the teachers an opportunity to say, what is it we should be concentrating on this year? Is there a group of students that, I know I'm really good with students who are high achievers, but am I as good with students who are low achievers? And can I differentiate my instruction enough, in fact, to move their student achievement? Is there a certain curriculum that I'm introducing this year, and how am I introducing that and changing my lesson plans to accommodate new textbooks or materials? So it's elective, it's built, there's measures at the bottom of student achievement, whether it be growth or actually what we call static achievement, which is the percent proficient advanced, and that's a dialogue between the principal and the teachers. One of the things as we beginning the training last year around this is we started to talk about the concept of these student learning objectives. But we realized early on in the training that teachers had not been trained in their higher ed courses on effective use of what I entitled data literacy. How to use test results, how to use the quick assessments that you do in the classroom to know whether it's ready for you to move on. How do I actually look at that data that I have? Wealth of information that we get on students as they come to us. How can I use that to improve my instruction? So we had to kind of step back and say, okay, we'll delay that implementation for a year. Let's go back and really do intensive training on data literacy. How do you use information to improve your practice to improve student achievement? So that's been a new effort for us, and I think we're going to see some. We're posting models of these electives online so people don't have to create the wheel. But I think we're going to start to see teachers, and they've said, we never really thought about this stuff before. Really never looked at the data to model. Our best teachers always have. And so that's where we're pulling a lot of our good examples. The principal effectiveness system, we didn't have one in Pennsylvania. We didn't have a principal rating. So we have, again, principal, what we call our principles of instructional leadership, called PIL program, where we train around that for our new principals. And they're the measures of effective leadership in the building. And then again, the right-hand side is the school building measure. There's then an elective for the principal. And then we have something called, it's called correlation, but it's really more of a relationship, which kind of protects teachers at both ends of the spectrum. So for example, if a principal just wants to come in and say, I'm just going to give everybody distinguished. But in fact, when you look at the correlation between their rating and the student, that teacher's test scores, and they're obviously, the test scores are low, these children aren't growing here, but you've rated them as distinguished, there's a problem, and so you don't get as much credit for not accurately implementing that evaluation system. But conversely, teacher may not be the most pleasant in a faculty meeting, but I'll tell you, in the classroom, they're whiz-bang and they're growing. So if you're rating the teacher low, but in fact their student achievement is high, it also says to the principal, go back and check this. There's a disconnect between the performance of the students in the classroom and how you're rating that teacher. And there's the conversation that the principals have with the superintendents about what do we need to do to improve your practice when you go in and have these critical conversations and observations with the teachers. So that's obviously new in the principal. And then we do know that we have educators that are not in the classroom, but they deliver a service. It's just not instruction. I'm talking about guidance counselors, dental hygienists, nurses. We have different rubrics for them so that it really reflects their practice. It isn't classroom instruction, it's a service. It may not be in the classroom, but you have an environment that you deliver in. So we changed it again by working with people that are actually in those roles to say, how can we reflect the quality of your practice on the Danielson side? It's not the same as a classroom teacher, but let us work on that so the principal has a guideline to look and say, this is an effective guidance counselor, this is an effective nurse, because of the practice that they've used. So they'll launch next year along with the principal evaluation. I'll stop there and see if you have questions on that. Again, it's raising the accountability of we raised it on the students, their standards in graduation, and now we're raising it on the delivery system, which is our classroom teachers, our support staff, and our principals.
Are you getting cooperation from the unions?
Well, actually, yeah, we did. I think both unions, PFT and PSEA, were at the table. They were part of the stakeholder group. They got a little nervous. They were fine on the Danielson side. They get a little nervous when you start to hold them accountable for. But I think through the course of the negotiations, when it came time for the piece of legislation, obviously legislators, Representative Almont from this area was the principal leader in pushing this new evaluation system. I think they realized that it's important for us as a profession to be able to demonstrate we're successful. Nobody likes to pay taxes. Nobody likes to have their taxes raised. And if we're going to go to businesses and we're going to go to homeowners, we have to be able to prove as a profession that we're successful. And the only way we can prove we're successful is when student achievement is increasing or stabilized at quality rates. The way we do that is improving our practice. And so ultimately, when at the end of the day, PSEA and PFT withdrew their objections and the legislation passed. So they have been great partners in providing training. I've been working with PSEA. I've been down to the PFT folks in Philly. Pittsburgh was way ahead of us in the model. They had started a couple years ahead of Regional State. So they hold our feet to the fire to make sure that when we promised resources, that we're delivering on the resources, which we have. And I've gone to the House of Delegates a number of times at PSEA to talk and hear the concerns and to respond to issues that they have, while still keeping the eye on the rigor that we need. So I'm pleased with the support that we've gotten.
How do you rate a school, city schools here? Several years ago, we had a story that there were 26 different languages being spoken by students here. How do you rate a school that has that kind of diversity? We're trying simply to teach someone how to speak the language. We've had Hispanic students who have tested well when you're given a list of numbers,
right,
but when you have to do a word problem, they don't understand it. So how do you rate that with the teacher and the school?
There's a number of different ways that we do that. First of all, there are programs for English language learners which delay some of the implementation of the test. There are accommodations that we can give based if it's in the child's IEP, which usually our English language learners have. What we also are doing is working in the accountability system to push what we call the cohort graduation rate, which says, which I've always struggled with, because for me as an educator, it's not how fast can the child get there, although some of it is really good, it's whether they get to the end line. So we've been instrumental in pushing the federal government to say, let us use a 4-year cohort, then a 5-year, then a 6-year, because isn't it more important that the child reaches proficiency than penalizing the schools for allowing them to give more time for those students to graduate? So we're trying to make the internal system more flexible to accommodate for that.
So the equivalent of what higher ed does when they some of theirs is spread out over a 6-year period as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, for me, it's important if they get there. Now, I'd like to have them get there on time, but we know, again, some children come in from families that have not done basic literacy or numeracy. And children, I was a superintendent of a school district, very poor school district outside of Harrisburg, still in Highspire, where, the first day of class, school, I'd be down in the elementary school helping the kids get to their classroom, and I'd say, what's your name? And they got their first name, it's, what's your last name? Okay, well, here, there's orange and green tags. You have an orange tag on. Let's look for the orange tag here. Orange, red, green, other colors. Obviously they don't know how to count. So what you have to do to intervene to move those children, which is why in our accountability system, we have those growth measures, which are very important. And the student is measured against themselves, not against it's how far they've grown in a year.
So
as
it's
opposed
more
to
of a personal best for them as opposed
Yes.
in the school as opposed to an AYP necessarily.
Exactly, but a personal best that looks at, did at least you grow a year? Because it's still, if you're behind, you're behind, so it's trying to nudge it each year, but being reasonable on how much you know, with the children that are coming not quite ready to learn. And for me, as an educator, it's always been, you know, I know a lot of people, well, you have to get them ready for school. Well, that's true, we love, and that's why we spend the money we do on the preschool. And pre-K counts, but it's also how can we accommodate the school to get the school ready to receive those children. It's a two-way street. So that's the teacher and principal evaluation system for accountability. Then,
What about superintendent and accountability?
well, that's interesting because the law stopped at principals. So there's a piece of accountability which when we get to the block grant, I'll talk a little bit about that if school boards wanted to use. That's probably right. There is no state, I don't have the authority to develop and implement an evaluation system for superintendents. There is, in regulation, talks about that's a conversation between the local school board and the superintendent, and those goals have to be published each year. I would hope that school boards would start to look at, again, something that we're using for the block grant, which is the school district score, that aggregated the school district score to look at achievement. But I don't have the authority for that. And some school districts have very rigorous evaluation systems for the superintendent. I know I had one when I was at Central Boston and also at Steel High. But a lot of times that's bargained when you come into when you have your contract that you have with the board. So let's talk about transparency a little bit. We were talking about the school performance profile that we worked on. That's that. We published it for the first time in September. It was on 12-13. I have to get my years right. 12-13 test scores, and again, that was that result of going around the state saying to principals, well, how would you like to be measured? So inside it also, we used this school performance profile, and there are measures of closing the achievement gap. So closing the achievement gap between all students and 100% proficiency, and then you have measures for what we call traditionally underperforming students, which are students in poverty, IEP students, English language learners, and so those populations and the all student group, and how fast you're closing that achievement gap. So this is the first year that we've published them. There's profiles for all public entities, so that's your traditional public schools, your vocational schools, your charter schools, and your cyber charter schools. So all of those scores are up there, and you can see on the left-hand side, if you haven't visited that site, there's lots of different ways to get in it. You can go by county, you can go by school district, and just type it in. Our type of school, so we try to make it as user-friendly as possible. I have to tell you, we've had over 300,000 visitors, I think, at this point, different visitors to come in. And what we have found is that it's being used most by parents to come in to look at their schools. You can come in and actually search by zip code. So if you're coming in or you're moving across the state and you want to find a school, and on the fast facts of, what's the diversity of the school, what is, how many kinds of honors courses do they offer, depending on your interests. There's a way to search for schools that way. But there's also a compare feature, because a lot of times I get a question about, well, charter schools and cyber schools scores don't look as strong as the public schools. And I said, well, remember, in order to be fair, if you're going to do that comparison, you need to go onto the compare feature, put in the cyber and charter school, and then compare it to its feeder systems. So if in fact you want to measure, are they doing at least as well as the community that they're serving? To me, that's a fair comparison. So you'll see that, in fact, some mastery charter schools in Philadelphia are doing at least, if not better, than the feeder patterns that they're doing. In some cases, the other charter school is not doing as well. And for me, as the cyber charter authorizer, and for all our renewals, and we've closed 2 schools, cyber charters, since I've been here, because of performance and other issues that we found. But we also were putting in our renewals for those charters academic performances. I've encouraged local school boards, who are the authorizers for traditional charter schools, to use the school performance profile in a fair way, measured against yourself, to in fact put academic goals, not only for yourself, but also for if you're going to renew the charter school. So it is a way that we can, again, hold all the public entities accountable on the same scorecard, if you will, so that we can do it fairly. Those are some wonderful charter schools that are out there.
How do you compare cyber charters? Because their feeder system is
We use the statewide averages. But most cyber charter schools, even though they're open, have a particular area that they draw from.
Mhm.
So you can also use that if you know where the students are coming from. And if you don't know, you give me a call and I can tell you. If I authorize them.
Is the transparency really the same though? Aren't there really different standards between a traditional public school system and traditional public schools? The kinds of transparency you have not only on testing, but also on how they're funded, where the money's going specifically. We don't have that really. You know, we're giving taxpayer money to the cyber charters, but we really don't have the same kind of transparency. Or would you argue that we do?
Well, it depends on what transparency you're talking about. I would say for standards, they are held to the same, they have to take the same tests. They have to teach the same standards. Again, obviously their methodologies are different because of the nature of the choice those parents have made to put the children there. So I think with the advent of this school performance profile, we have moved toward making that transparency very visible on the performance of charters and cybers. We never had that before. The only things they don't have to do, and again that's by law, is they don't have to use the teacher evaluation system, but they are, have been part of our pilot. They don't have to have, they can have 25% uncertified teachers. Again, I'm not saying that certificate is the be-all and end-all, but it is the state's measure that at least there's been a rigor in the content, if you will. But if that's how they choose to have their staff, again, the law provides that. What we say is that that's your local control. You still are accountable as the same as every other public school for these state assessments.
But the funding and that sort of thing isn't as transparent. We did a big series on cyber charter schools and cyber charters, and there was just a lot of questions about how taxpayer money was actually being spent, and there were concerns about how many of the test scores fared, and I know you're saying that that's being addressed, but I think there were some issues raised in that, and that's kind of what I'm speaking to.
Yes, I think perhaps what you're saying is that it is, how they get their money is very transparent on the 363, and it's
right.
Those things that the school district is accounting for instruction. And then it's reduced to an instructional amount of money per child, and that money is taxpayer money, and it leaves the traditional public school and follows the parent's choice into another public school, which is a charter or cyber. Where the lack of transparency may be is once it gets to that school, then how is it used? And that's an issue for the legislature to deal with.
It is.
Charter school.
It's a concern for I think for districts and taxpayers though too, because it does, and that may be an issue beyond here, but for example, the amount of money that's used on advertising and that sort of thing, if traditional public schools were advertising on television and in other places, that would be an issue and fodder for, I think, community
Charter school
clamor.
reform.
Yeah.
I'm ready. They just have to ask me. I'll be at the table with them. So, yeah. So that's, again, our journey for accountability and transparency that we have. So how are we supporting that in the next budget? And so the next series of issues that I'll just take you through, I'll talk a little bit about the current budget that's before the legislature. I had my appropriations hearing at the House on Tuesday. I have my next Wednesday with the Senate to answer a lot of their questions. So again, we've made an historic investment of $12 billion in the education budget. You can see kind of a breakout on that chart of how that money is being distributed, I would remind you, this is just the state share. If you add, and Tim, you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm maybe trying to remember all these facts, but if you add the federal and the local shares, we're over $27, $28 billion
That's just K to 12.
for K-12 education, which is a lot of money. So that we have some new initiatives I kind of want to talk about. You have a little chart there, because a lot of times we hear this, issue about how money was taken away from the public schools. That little chart that you see are line items in the budget that, in fact, were used by the Rendell administration when they were showing state support for public education. And so to be fair, we used the same line items to make that comparison. What isn't on the chart, as you can see the state share under the previous administration dropping, was that they were replacing state money with the federal stimulus money that was given. So the schools were actually getting more money, but it was through federal dollars instead of state dollars. So when the Corbett administration came into office, that was the year, unfortunately, that the president obviously withdrew the stimulus money. And then we've been struggling to try to replace that money as we could with a fragile economy and taxpayers who and businesses who were stretched, and say, we'll do the best we can. And as you can see, the money that was put into this year is at an all-time high on those same line items that we used in the previous administration to compare state support. So, so where is that $10 billion being spent? The first one is in a new initiative called the Ready to Learn Block Grant. I take a step back to say, when we got the first school performance profile scores that came out, we took a look at those percent proficient advanced, but mainly the growth. What were the school districts who were making, or school buildings, making unusual amount of growth, more than a year? And we looked at the schools that weren't quite making the year, that were struggling. So knowing a lot of the superintendents, of the staff at the department, we picked up the phone and we called and said, for those who made unusual high growth, what did you attribute? What programs did you put into place? What did you do that you believe caused these great results? And they gave us their opinion. Conversely, we called the schools that had less than a year's growth and said, what do you attribute? If you had more money, how would you spend it that could raise student achievement? What do you wish you could have done? In a lot of cases, some of the folks were new, but they could say what was missing in their school districts. Interestingly enough, whether it was what the wish I could have done to what I did do, focused at early learning initiatives in K-3, making sure that that curriculum and those textbooks were strongly aligned to the state standards and the assessments, to say, if this is getting children on grade level by grade 3, this is where we need to make that early investment in aligning that curriculum map. Again, if you go onto the standards aligned system, you'll see free resources that will help you make those alignments. Here is the map that we need to do, and give us money to do professional development with our teachers to help when we call them in and we do this alignment, because that's who you should be doing it with, as saying, are we really teaching this in first grade? Do the materials match that? So that was the first thing we heard from superintendents. The second one was we need extended learning opportunities. Not all children, at least some were telling us, need full-day kindergarten. But for us, English language learners, students who are coming in through poverty, they need the full-day kindergarten. They need those extended learning opportunities. Or they need a full-day program for all of them. We heard superintendents who were there that have done well say, we've done all that. This is how we aligned it. But you know what? If I had extra money, I know you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to give you that feedback to me anyway. They said we would love money for the new Keystones for supplementary instruction. We'd like to have the resource for that. So what you see reflected on these steps are in fact superintendent's feedback to say this is what we did or what we wish we could do to move student achievement. The investment in this $240 million new dollars, is the governor's interest in focusing investments on student achievement with a focus on early learning to get kids ready by 3. I mean, if you're in education, you know that those first few years are learning to read, but after that, once you're on grade level, it's reading to learn other subjects. So if you're not on grade level, you're hindered as you go forward in other subjects. So it's that that shift in third grade that's so important. So we focused it here. Now, some of the superintendents have said, well, what is in the interim time? I've already implemented that. Great. There's a waiver built into this. If you think you've already implemented this, show us the aligned curriculum. What now would you like to do to improve student achievement? I have this program, I'd like to reinforce it and expand it. Great. I have one superintendent called and said, you know, I had to cut my music program, but I really had an integrated basic skills music program where we're reinforcing some of the content in reading, but also the content in math. Some of the art programs do that. Great. If you can show how it will raise student achievement, ask for the waiver. It's focused at making an investment in improving student achievement. Obviously, the farther up you go, the higher the scores, the more flexibility you get, because you can also then look down at the old ABG where you have class size reduction, you have a lot of different opportunities to use that. You don't even need to ask the state. When we did the composite of the building scores, and we just sent this out to the superintendents to have them look at the formula, towards their K-12 formulas, and look at the data and make sure that we've appropriately collapsed the building scores and are reflecting now a school district score. Most of our schools, 82% of them, are in the upper 2 tiers. With all the flexibility that they need, even without a waiver, which is happy news for me. We're doing very well. We may have inside a district a building that needs some support, but generally we're doing very well. So that $240 million, again, is an investment. The formula that we'll be using doesn't depend on your school performance profile. The formula to drive the money out is in fact the same for all school districts. It deals with the ADM count. How many students do you actually have this year? Times your aid ratio, which is a measure of the local community's ability to fund the schools. Then we add 2 add-ons, because one is a factor, which is a portion of the fee that we're giving for each student for the numbers of English language learners that you have. Again, with the nod that we know that you need more resources for those, and if you have higher poverty, and again, an add-on to there. So it's driven out the same to all schools. How you use the money is dependent on how far along the continuum of implementing good instructional practices or good curriculum and content for your students. Again, if you've done it and you want to move on and you want to use it for other things that improve student achievement, that's great, and the state will be providing those waivers for that flexibility for superintendents to use. But this is an investment in student achievement. The dollars are tied to moving student achievement at the local level, with all the flexibility of the programs that our chief school officers know they have. So that's the money that, now, I've been asked, why aren't you going to drive it out in the old ABG formula? Well, the old, that $100 million that will still, it's kind of like a hold harmless that goes in there for that first $100 million, was run on ADMs that were back in 2002, 2003, and on poverty factors and test scores, PSSA test scores. That's how the formula works, from 2002, 2003. Well, some of our schools have gotten a lot better. Some aren't getting a lot better. Some populations have shifted. Some districts have gotten richer and poorer. So we didn't want to put it into an old formula. We wanted to put it into a formula that represented current realities, the current numbers of students that you have, and your current measures of wealth, if you will. We didn't put it into BEF, because BEF, again, and distribute the money that way, even though we could have said we could distribute it in BEF and it could still be for student achievement, because the last time we ran BEF was in the 90s. Again, that's even worse than the old ABG, the ABG formula. Based on populations back in the 90s, based on aid ratios, things have changed in some school districts and in some communities. So what we want to do is, in fact, be good stewards of where we believe, when we ever get to reforming and having a good basic instructional subsidy, let's look at good practice. We know we need to have a base so that schools aren't disrupted, but shouldn't we be funding schools based on the numbers of students they actually have and on the wealth of the districts, or the lack of wealth of the communities that we actually have nowadays? And so that is why we decided to distribute it this way, because it's really more reflective of current economics. Yeah.
Under the Rendell administration, there was the costing out study and a formula based on the recommendations. That was scrapped under Corbett, correct?
Well, it was actually never implemented under Rendell either.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, there was not sufficient money to put in. So again, it was based on how much you had, what's the delta between what the vision was and how much you had. So the formula was never fully implemented under there. So have we gone a different way? Yes. And I think one of the things we'd like to do is to have a more transparent system. Again, I'm a math major, and I've looked at the logarithms that calculate how that money is driven out under that costing out study. I struggle. I don't think it's as transparent as how many students do you have? What is your wealth? What are those things that we add on because we know that you need extra money for those certain populations? Then build in, how do we gently implement it so that we're not continuing to fund students that no longer exist, but we don't destabilize school districts. So we first need to agree on what are the parameters of the new formula, then what's sufficiency, and then how do you implement it in a way that you start to give money to school districts who actually are earning it based on the students in the poverty, but gently wean those whose populations have dramatically declined.
Well, it's news to me.
Mhm.
I followed the funding formula
Mhm.
and its implementation, its
Mhm.
development.
Mhm.
Those criticisms were not aired at that time. Well, I don't understand where they're coming from now.
Okay. I'm not sure quite what you mean by the criticisms. The criticisms on...
You're saying that the Rendell formula was not, is somehow flawed. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
I think it, first of all, I think there's a lot of dialogue that would need to occur on what sufficiency and how that was calculated. I don't think it's as, the way it is funded and the formulas are as transparent as they need to be. And it's just that I have a difficult time getting up to explain it to people. I would rather explain to people on, we're funding the number of children that you have, and we're funding it on the relative wealth of the school, and then we're funding it on special populations that need to be. I just think it needs another look. And I am very hopeful that I think if you know Representative Bernie O'Neill has put forth a plan to go in to look at revising the basic instructional subsidy formula we have, which is the old 90s one. I am hopeful that we can get together like we did for special education and the Special Ed Funding Commission that he and Senator Brown, and we worked last year on it, and we got it done quickly. It got bipartisan support that revises the way we distribute special ed funding to schools. That's very relatively transparent. These types of students in speech and language don't take as much money as opposed to these students who may have a higher, and then these children who are multiply handicapped. Clear, understandable, we put it out. And I hope that we can get a bipartisan support as we come into this next year to really focus at a basic instructional subsidy, so that this time next year when we're sitting here having this conversation, we can talk about a new formula for students.
Okay. The criticism I'm hearing also about the new block grant
Mhm.
is that you can give a grant this year and next year you could take it away.
Mhm.
So as opposed to being the BEF, which generally you expect that at least holds harmless, so that there's difficulty in districts deciding where to put this money
Mhm.
if they're not really sure it's going to be here in years to come.
Well, I would say I'd try to answer that in two ways. One is that the Corbett's administration intention to keep this in the formula, to keep this block grant in the budget in successive years. We can't account for what future administrations might do, but it is our intention to keep this as a stable funding source to schools, so they should think to count on it. The only thing I would say that might change is the fact that if we do get a new basic instructional subsidy formula, and we go to implement that for the following year, it may be wise to put all the money into one place, if in fact we have a true, honest, and transparent system, to put it all in one place. And I think that those conversations should occur while we're having the commission work on this. But it wouldn't be a loss. Now, the other thing, remember, is that for this block grant, that we would be running that formula. So if you've lost students, or you've increased a special needs population of English language learners, let's say, the formula will be sensitive to shifting those resources from year to year. It won't be what you got last year and then we just drive the new money out that way. I think good practice says you should have a floor. You shouldn't get less than, I think some states say 97% than you got the year before. But it should be reflective of how districts are shifting and how local communities, the wealth of a local community is shifting. We need to get into a better practice of distributing the money and investing more wisely. Just my personal opinion. Block grant. Okay. Let's go to the part of the block grant, which is the Expanding Excellence Grant, which is, again, one of the things that when I was asking superintendents about what, if you could invest in this, what would you, what did you do? The great stories I heard about some of the programs that match on our school performance profile, some of those content pieces and those innovative programs, I pitched when I was over at the budget office to say, I'd really like to reward those schools that have programs that we'd like to replicate and that people they could use as a mentor with other schools that are not as strong in this component. So what we're putting, we were able to hold $1 million in a competitive grant that will go out to schools that have a 90 or above in the school performance profile to say, well, on the components that are in this profile, what program did you use? Maybe it's increasing attendance. Maybe it was supporting better, maybe safety nets for promotion rate. Maybe it was an honors course that they put in, a revised curriculum. Maybe it was something in a third grade reading. But let's reach out, let's package that in a program that another district could use and replicate it so they would understand it. And our hope is that it's really a mentoring, proven practices nod. And then in December, we have something called the Standards, our SAS Institute, where the superintendents and principals come in from around the state, and we talk about new initiatives. We've been using a lot on teacher effectiveness lately, a lot of the school performance profile, but turn part of this conference into highlighting great practices and mentoring and matching up the folks that need the help with those that have already found a solution. So that's the grant. We'll be looking to go out to say to superintendent shortly, do you have an interest in applying for this? And if you do, what is the component? And then we'd like to get a nice span of districts, rural, urban, and suburban, and rich, poor, just big, small, so that when we actually go to the SAS Institute, districts can see themselves. I know that as a superintendent, I was a superintendent of a very small school district at Steel High. And then my next superintendency, so I went from like 1,200 kids to 10,000. And some things that I could do in one school I couldn't do in another. But if I could see myself in a program, because it was being delivered by a school like me, small, and urbanish versus very large, and dispersed from urban, rural, and suburban in one district, it's easier for me than to say, I can take that and implement it here. So that's why we'd like to get a nice geographical mix and a mix of content for these excellent programs. Lots of good stuff happening out there, lots of good stuff. The hybrid learning grant, $10 million, again, competitive grant. Again, last 2 years we've been using leftover federal Title II-A money, I think it is, that is actually teacher training money that we're allowed to use and that weren't used by districts in the regular formula, so we repurposed it and we're able to fund some school districts that wanted to try new teaching strategies. And the new teaching strategies, I think I just explained this before with the direct instruction, the team cooperative learning groups, and then individual instruction. That's supported by technology and digital content. Excellent results that we've gotten in increasing student achievement. So what we'd like to do is, again, offer that. There are other ways of diversifying. Sometimes they call it flipped classrooms, where in fact students go home and they see the content online and then they come in and it's reinforced in the classroom the next day. So they're the types of things that's different instructional strategies that we can get to students to raise student achievement. And again, it'll be for either planning and implementation grants or for those that already have it, expanding grants. We're excited that the governor has put this into this year's budget.
What tiers will that be open to?
Anybody.
all 4 tiers?
All 4 tiers, yeah. And both, obviously, the first one, you have to have a building that's 90 or above to get the mentoring grant. But the hybrid grant is open to everybody.
What will the grant be awarded based on competitiveness?
Well, a number of things. One, the quality of the response. And I'm not talking quality so that if you went out and got a professional writer versus somebody, a practitioner sat down and said, here's my vision. It'll be, is it really an instructional strategy that's changing the way we're delivering the education? And then, again, I'd like to make sure that we get a nice, I've had rural superintendents to say, look, we're not a Lower Merion, we can't afford to have somebody write this grant. And I said, that's fine. Just put in your program, and what we'd like to, again, is to make sure we get across the state with these, and that we reward it and have a diverse number of types of districts to do that. So again, that we can see what the schools that we have now in the hybrid learning are very similar in profile and in one area of the state. So the way you know whether you have a winner here is that you get it out, you get it across the state, you get it in big and small, you get it in rich and poor, you get it in urban and suburban and rural, and you say, does it work there? And then we know as we go out in the future to do this. So we're looking at, again, a nice spread across the state for quality programs.
I can't stay for the whole presentation, so if I could just interject a question that I have and then I need to go. So last year, the new funding was driven through the BEF. On top of that, there was supplemental funding of about $30 million. It went specifically to 21 districts. Will that happen again this year?
The new money that, in this budget is, all the new money is going into, what you got last year you got. In BEF you'll get again. But the new money will be driven out in the block grant.
Okay.
There'll be no additional money.
There will be, the governor won't sign a budget that will have supplemental grants for specific school districts.
You mean the supplemental grants that went to specific school district, that has gone into their base? I believe, but I will check that.
I know, that's my understanding, went into their base.
We haven't, if your question is have we reduced
No,
BEF?
No.
Okay.
The question is, will you again have the supplemental funding for specific school districts?
Will there be add-ons to?
Right.
There will be no additional monies other than what was spent last year in BEF to those particular districts. So there'll be no additional money put into BEF. Well, I can't say that there won't. I don't control the legislature. The governor will not put any add-ons onto the BEF. His new money in for art is going into the hybrid learning. Whether there'll be additional add-ons, I have to ask the legislature about that.
Okay.
I don't control.
I know, but...
There's no request from the administration to do that.
All right. The governor signs the budget, and he signed the budget last year that did that, so that's fair to ask the administration as to whether or not you want the legislature to do that again this year or not.
I think what we'll do is we'll look at the whole total budget and whether we can afford the budget that's passed. I think the governor has worked in good partnership with the legislature when they delivered a budget and delivered a budget on time. He has signed it. I don't speak for the governor on that, but I believe if his programs are kept into the budget and the legislature has other interests, that's what cooperation's all about. Thank you. So, special education. Just to move on to another one. The first time in 6 years, new money. There's a $20 million increase in special education that will be funded based on the commission's report in those 3 tiers. We're working with the legislature now to develop that language, those formulas for implementation.
So only the increase will be distributed based on?
Exactly. There's a whole harmless in what you got the year before. Thank you, but it's the way it is. And again, while we want to do good practice and we want to fund current students, you also have to be careful you don't destabilize school districts, by pulling money away too quickly. The governor's schools, new initiative. We have one governor's school we've been running. They were sunsetted back in 2009. New initiative, them bringing back to life again. We have one that's out in Carnegie Mellon on sciences. 2 new ones will be added this summer, one on technology and engineering and one on agriculture. They are summer residential programs for usually rising seniors who have a particular interest and talent in those areas. And again, it's a summer program. I think 6 weeks in most of the programs where they go on campus. They are taught by industry leaders in the particular fields and also higher ed professors. It's very intensive programs, and we're happy to see these come back online.
Do you know where they're going to be? The other two?
What we would like to do is to move them and make sure they're not all in one part of the state. So we're looking centrally for one, and then maybe a little more toward this side of the state, going toward the east. The important thing is, first of all, they have to have an expertise in that area, so that you have college faculty that can help deliver it. The second is that we want to make sure that the dorms are available, in the summer, so they have to be able to accommodate the students in residence. But we're about a few weeks away from making those announcements.
Does the state still have the Governor's School for the Arts at Bucknell, or has that been canceled?
No, but I know there's a strong interest to bring that one back also.
Yeah, how were these subjects chosen?
Mainly focused at STEM initiatives and making sure that we're responding. Obviously, agriculture is very important to Pennsylvania, and to make sure we support that, but mainly on emerging technologies and emerging jobs that we have, what they call in the woodwork high priority job occupations. Early learning, again, moving, just quickly through that, 3 and 4 year olds in pre-K counts. We've added 10 million more in that program, serving about another 1,670. We've, for early learning, the governor has made an investment. We're at 16.3% since increase in those fundings, which is a phenomenal investment in early learning. Head Start, again, funding at the same levels, and early intervention, and that's for students that have IEPs that are more at risk in coming in. Money to support more spots for those children.
You mentioned 16.3%. Is that over the course of the last 4 years, or last year to this year?
To this year, or the 4 years, since 2010, yeah. Post-secondary, a new initiative there is a grant. One of the things that we have found, and working with FIA, is that when they take a look at the debt burden of students, that the largest debt burden are between, I think it's 60 to 80,000 to 100,000 when your adjusted income comes, because that's where the money starts not to be available as you move up the traditional FIA grants. So 25 million in a new grant program that will be run through FIA, but it will be based on 110 and below, so that we're trying to pick up more of the middle income families that may not have been eligible before, but also based on merit. So merit meaning they're coming out of high school when the keystones get fully implemented, where you're proficient in advanced, or international baccalaureate program scores, or advanced placement scores, those types of things based on merit, and then for continuing your GPA, some measure of GPA in the college to continue that grant. And we're working out all those details with FIA at the moment. Excited about that. Let's see, just so that you don't think we've been just asking taxpayers to help us to implement our programs, just I'd like to finish up by saying there's been 3 major grants since the Corbett administration has been in here. One was back in September of 2011 called the Striving Readers Grant, which is $190 million that we brought in to help to reframe resources for early learning, and also to support pre-K to 12 instruction for teachers, good practice for teachers. That same year was really obviously a good year for us. We were the winners of the Race to the Top Phase 3, the $41 million grant. That's what we've used principally to support the development and support all the training on the new teacher evaluation system and principal evaluation and all those courses that I talked about that we loaded or paid for out of that grant. And then just recently, this December, we got a $51 million grant that actually is to support early learning, training of those early learning teachers, and then helping to support more spots, if you will, for elementary schools and low-performing elementary schools, usually related to to the aid ratio that you would look at districts, but then to network the community resources and the public school resources. So there's better transitions between the preschool private into public. And so that, we just were awarded that, so we're working, again, all the details of that. And with that, I'll stop.
What's your biggest concern when you look at public education in Pennsylvania? What, is there something that keeps you up at night?
Pension reform.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, I think as I talked to the House Appropriations Committee, it's not one party's fault. We've all participated in getting where we are today. But I do worry that if we don't have pension reform, that the money that should be going toward in other instructional costs will be going toward funding pension. Now, again, pension is part of instructional costs because it's the fringe benefits for which those teachers and those principals that are leading the buildings are there. But it is, again, driven out. State doesn't sit at the bargaining table. State doesn't bargain, so we don't participate in those increases in salaries, which increase pension costs and obviously other issues. But we pay at least 50%, regardless of the aid ratio of the school district on pension and Social Security. So for every dollar of pension, the state is paying 50 cents. And if in fact your aid ratio is higher, we pay up to whatever the high, so if you're 0.8 aid ratio, we pay 80 cents on the dollar for, again, those pension costs. We have to find a better way, and we know we can't harm current retirees. That's certainly not fair nor legal. We don't take away what's already earned for current employees. So we really need to find a way that we're sensitive to providing a safety net, which is what pensions are supposed to be for folks, but not expanding perhaps a hybrid approach between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan. So I'm hopeful that, again, we can look at bipartisan support. I'm a Pollyanna, can you tell? That, as we look at basic instructional subsidy, we can also look at pension reform to find a way that we can alleviate some of the burden on the taxpayer while still honoring and keeping our commitments to public employees. We just have to find a way to do this better.
What kind of legislation would you support? Something where you switch everyone over, current employees and new employees to a 401?
I think basically what we're looking at this point is a good compromise that would come out of the legislature. I think for the administration, we're focused at new employees. But again, we're willing to work with both sides of the aisle to get.
That's not going to solve the problem.
Not immediately.
No, but
it may cause a problem from happening again, but
I think what helps immediately, again, if you get good pension reform going forward and you have some limits on what the state's obligations are with a hybrid approach, you start to realize some savings immediately. And with the collars, the temporary fix that we have, you get some immediate relief for school district. I think we provided you some of that information. So that combination of immediate relief for not only the state but school districts, but true pension reform that will pick up the continuing obligation that would start right next year for any new person that's hired. You certainly start to get relief that way. We need to do something.
And is there something, I am not, and would never say that I'm especially proficient at mathematics. Perhaps I could have used your tutelage.
So it's okay.
And so, obviously we talk a lot about numbers here, and numbers fuel a lot of things, funding and assessments and all of that. When you look across the state and some things that are being done in education today, and I'm thinking just programs, are there some things that you're particularly excited about or have high hopes in? And I'm talking specifically as it relates to initiatives, curriculum, that kind of thing.
Well, I think we've put into place all the big things that as an educator, I think we've put in those standards and tests that will measure the rigor that really, and what I try to also say to people is we're going to see a little dip in some of those scores as these more rigorous tests come on. We need to catch up with the curriculum and catch up with instructional practices. So be gentle with ourselves, you know, as we go into moving to more rigor. Certainly those keystones are more rigorous than that 11th grade test, much more rigorous. So, and we have the support system. I'm happy that we've got that those basic issues. Happy with the fact that we now have a transparent way to demonstrate our journey and our successes in our school performance profile. The money for early learning and for hybrid learning on different instructional strategies. That's exciting to me. I think that the more we can learn about, again, differentiating our delivery systems, the stronger we'll get. I'm pleased with the supports that we've been able to, because of the federal grants, put in that will help our teachers improve their practice and highlight those that grow students more than, you know, a year's worth of growth. I think we're on the right track. I think we've got all those pieces in place. It's having the will to continue to implement them, to having the stomach to take us through where we may see dips as we're working toward more rigor, and keeping the faith that these are the right things to do for our students in Pennsylvania. And that includes all those two basic reforms, and the basic instructional subsidy and the pension that will help us get there and support those things as we go forward. I think we've got all the right pieces in place now. It's just having the fortitude to see them through.
Are you concerned that either next year or 4 or 5 years out, the new governor comes in, they decide to change the system? Is that a concern? I think the public is concerned that we seem to go from one thing to another. And it's
Well, I have to say that I give governors from Thornburg on the benefit of knowing that standards needed to be revised. So the standards that we've adopted now are efforts that preceded us. So we are just finishing that. And the governors and the secretaries of education had the good sense not to unpackage it and repackage it just to put their own bows and whistles on that. So we've had that steady increase. I think the tests that we've been working on has been carried over from previous administrations, and we're implementing those programs and the support systems that go with that. I worry less about changes in teacher evaluation and the school performance profile, because to change those, you're going to have to change the law. Those things are in law. That I don't worry much about. And the money that paid for the support system on SAS has been spent, and those things are now free on that website. So why take away a free resource? So I don't worry as much about that. I worry about our ability to find common ground on those two issues that I keep pushing on, which is changing the basic instructional formula and then pension. That worries me, that we need to fix that. I mean, that's the next part of the journey, for me at least.
I want to go back to pensions for a second. I was reminded the other day, I had a call from a retired teacher, and who retired before the increase. Was it 2005?
Yeah.
2001.
Prior to that, those teachers did not benefit by that increase. That 25% increase, I think, and 50% for the legislature. So we're talking about a 10-year window here. So why not just close the window? Why doesn't the legislature just roll back the pensions to the 205 level?
That's me.
Okay, fine.
That's
Sorry.
me. Somebody wondering where I am, I think. Well, I'm not sure.
You're going to upset a lot of people, but
Yeah.
but
I'm
not
not
as
sure.
many as you think.
You mean roll back the 2.5%
Yeah.
on current employees? What they've already earned? I
The
think.
increases that were given in 2005, 25% bump.
Oh, change the multiplier
Yeah,
going
just-
forward.
Yeah,
Going
just
forward.
roll,
Well, that-
legislatively,
part of
roll back those increases to the 2005 level.
It's part of the conversation on pension reform.
That would be a substantive step. This other step you were talking about, we won't be around by the time you see any real results.
But it depends on all the components that are put into place. Some
But I
of
can
it,
tell you that retired teacher I was talking to was really upset
Oh.
that they did not get part of that. They felt slighted as mild word, but,
Wow, yes, I used to hear those complaints.
so, anyway, food for thought.
Based on the standards that came out in the test scores, when we put a chart together of Lancaster County, and I think you can probably find this in a lot of other places throughout the state, the schools that had the worst scores were ones where there's a lot of poverty. I think that it kind of rubbed people, I've gotten some, Mike Sterla and have talked a little bit about how they're below that 60 or something, but it affects how they spend their money. So a lot of people argue, should those schools that have those lower scores have more flexibility in how they spend their money, because they may be dealing with things in their schools that some of those other schools aren't dealing with. There's violence in some schools. There's a lot of other things that they're dealing with. The students are not coming from, they could be homeless, that those other school districts aren't dealing with. So should they have more flexibility than those ones that are doing really well?
Well, let me just say back, if in fact it's something that a superintendent would say, I need to spend money to stabilize the safety of my school, which will increase my student achievement, that's what the waiver's for. What we don't want the money is to disappear into programs or other issues that have no impact on student achievement. So if the school district superintendent in those lower areas can demonstrate the fact that they need something to stabilize a school environment that will then increase student achievement, I'm all ears. But it has to go toward focusing on student achievement.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a new program. It can be an existing.
That you want to enhance and support
After
or
school
continue
programs
because you're afraid that you have to cut it.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't require creation of something.
Okay, because there was some question about that.
Yeah. I think they have more flexibility than they believe in there. And in fact, when I was speaking just today, a number of superintendents came up afterward that were there and said, no, I didn't even realize, we thought, now we realize we have a lot more flexibility than we thought. So, again, it has to be focused in making the quality of the instructional process and life of the students better. There's all kinds of ways to do that.
Would Pennsylvania be better served if there were fewer individual school districts?
I don't know that Pennsylvania would be better served. I think there are some communities and some children that would be better served if in fact there were merged populations that could then offer the students in the schools that are experiencing fiscal constraint because of their size or because of the economies, the industries have disappeared. I'm thinking of Steel High for one.
Well, I'm thinking that as well as also
Yes.
with Columbia and Lancaster County.
Yes. That's difficult, though. I have to tell you that often what gets in the way is our football teams and mascots of their instructional decisions. So I'll just leave it at that. We are there as a department to support any merger discussions. We have staff that can help people through that to look at what the barriers might be. But it really...
What's been the most recent merger that you would be aware of?
2009.
2009, I'm trying to think of...
Pittsburgh, Bella, and
It was in Beaver County.
Okay, right, yeah.
But there are conversations going on in a number of areas where the superintendents have contacted me and said, could you give us some help or just resources that we could use? And so we help those conversations along.
And the merger before that was in the 70s or 80s.
Wow.
So
The one merger when I was here in Thornbury that we had was the General Braddock.
that made,
That was a federal court mandate.
I think that's.
Yeah, that was, because there's two different ways of looking at those types of things. And I remember because I was here under Scanlon as the Secretary of Education, which was bring me a plan that implodes, which is just what the General Braddock was, where you had the New Woodland Hills created, which is taking multiple districts, I call it the implosion, or the explosion like we had in Duquesne, where those children have been tuitioned out to other school districts for their education. So there's a number of different ways to accomplish it.
Okay.
But just have to focus on what's best for the children.
How about a later starting time for school?
Later starting time?
Yeah.
That's a local decision.
Is it possible to do now?
Oh, yeah. The only impossible things that are happening, I know, again, coming from Dauphin County, is I used to base it on when my calendar started based on when Labor Day fell. But if, in fact, you were the superintendent in Darien Township, you based it on Hershey Park. and the need for students to be there through that end of that summer
No,
program.
no, I'm talking about starting class.
Hour of the day.
Oh, hour of the day,
Later in the.
local decision,
Mhm.
local decision.
Well, how do you feel?
Well, again, it's interesting. I'd have to look at the student population. I know that some folks say, well, high school students need to come in later because they're too sleepy to do, but elementary kids are doing early. I'm not sure I know all that, but I would say, you know, you're a superintendent, you know your population best, you make the decision that's best for your children in your school district. I'm not going to interfere with that.
I'm interviewing a lot of people who are running for different offices, state house, senate houses, and a lot of them want more education funding. And my first question to them is, okay, how do you plan for the state to pay for it?
Yeah.
And they're all about, you know, a severance tax or something on natural gas drillers. What is your stance on that at all, as far as, you know, it's hard to deny that it would be a nice revenue source or boost for education funding. Do you get involved in conversations at all about that?
I listen to those conversations. I didn't get involved in them. That's for Secretary of the Revenue, Secretary of the Budget, and the Governor and the Legislature to decide.
But you don't come, you're not an advocate at all for any, okay.
I'm an advocate for the money I can grab. That's where that revenue comes. I try to explain that when, again, at this last appropriations hearing, when people are saying, we want more money, we want for this and this and this, I'm saying, great. You know, but remember, we don't have a printing press. It comes from people and businesses, you know, so you have to balance your wanting for expenditures with our ability to raise the resources. And that's on you to decide. You know, you give it to me, I'll find appropriate ways to spend that money that help children.
Are you optimistic about a pension reform package?
I'm
You said
optimistic
Pollyanna
that, yes,
before, I
I
understand
am.
that, but
Yeah,
it's-
I am optimistic that there are conversations now beginning to occur that seem more serious than in the past. I just keep saying and I'll say it again and again, we have to have pension reform if we are going to survive the next few years in funding, because we're just taking an unusual amount of resources out of other programs to fund the pension increases.
And you've spoken with PSEA members and as a former president, what kind of response?
I wasn't the elected person, I was the hired person, I was the executive director.
But
They're very fussy about that, staff versus governance.
But have you gotten any kind of response from them? Do they understand the problem, or obviously they understand the problem, but how, any ways that they think that it could be alleviated?
I don't speak for PSE anymore, you'd have to ask them, yeah. I know that they've been fully engaged in the conversations.
Okay.
Pennsylvania Core,
Sanders?
yes, so you've said that it's not the Common Core state standards. But I hear a lot about what the difference is between Common Core and what states may have been doing before, but so beyond it being more rigorous, what are the focal points, what are the differences?
Between our old academic standards and the new ones that we have?
Right.
I think,
What would you see in the classroom that's different?
I think there's a number of things, and you're pulling me a little out of my comfort area when I talk about literature and reading, but from what I can gather from our experts in that part of the rigor, there is more of an emphasis on primary documents, so that it's not just fiction, that you're actually reading the Federalist Papers or the Constitution, or directions, on how to put something together, following those types of things. So there is more of an emphasis on nonfiction reading than actually newspaper articles. That learning how to read through and what was really being said.
I'd like to do that.
Yeah, so we as superintendent, we always used the newspaper in the school day.
Yeah.
There was a program that we spent that, the Patriot. So anyway, and now they went to digital learning, so we're going to have this hybrid classroom so kids can get the newspaper online. But the other side from math, so there's that emphasis on nonfiction, and actually introducing earlier into the primary grades poetry and reading poetry and understanding poetry, that we haven't had before. So in math, it really is looking at more application. So it's, for example, when we had test questions on our 11th grade PSSA before, you may have said, here's a formula for a line, graphing a line. And we know that the standard form is y equals mx plus b. What's the slope of the line? Well, you look at the formula, you look at what m is, and you say that's the slope. Now, we're saying to students, here are the coordinate points of a line. What's the slope of this line? Is it going the slope this way? Is it that you actually then have to take the formula, which computes the slope, and then determine the slope of the line, as opposed to what we call plug and chug versus application. It will ask more questions about how to apply the math than ever before. There'll be those dreaded word problems that, as a math teacher, you had all the ones that you just plug the numbers in and the formula, but then you had 3 of the word problems where you actually had to take the learning and apply it to something you may use when you get out. Now it's more a distribution of, well, we'll ask you a fewer questions to make sure you understand the mathematics and the matrix of it, but now let's do a lot more on application. So they're the big differences in the math course.
And what percentage of the Pennsylvania core standards comes from Common Core and versus coming from what Pennsylvania does better?
Yeah, our academic standards, I have to say, because we were already moving in that way from before the Common Core movement came, were already pretty rigorous. So, I would suggest that when you look at 3rd grade math, not a lot of difference. If you're talking about adding and subtracting, and other than maybe expecting double digits versus single digits, there isn't a lot of different, and so you won't see much of a change between academic standards and some of the primary issues, other than moving a little bit of the rigor down earlier. So I would say from the Pennsylvania academic standards to the now Pennsylvania core standards, you would see more of a difference there and then if you compare the standards that we have now with the standards that the rest of the nation is looking at. I think ours match, in fact, maybe even a little stronger in some areas, at least in that. I can't speak specifically to the literature or the biology. I know the biology, the standards for science, the trajectory to get to that rigor is much steeper now in early learning to understand the biological sciences.
Thank you very much.
Good.
You've been very generous with your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you. You have too. Thank you. I appreciate your interest.
Karen, if you have a minute.
Sorry?
If you have a second.
Yep.
Before you leave.
Safe trip back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was nice
Thank
meeting
you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Put these at that desk when we leave.
Oh, yes, I'll walk down with you.
Okay, great.